In this lab, we'll design this scissors jack, and then we will analyze how much force is required to lift up a car with our hand at, say, this position or this position or this position. And so the first part that we will model will be this base stand. And so let's go down through the drawings and let's find that base stand. And I see that the overall width, looking at from the top, is 5 inches from here over to here, and then the front to back from here to here is 3.5 inches. So let's start to set this up. So I'll go into Fusion, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder, and I'm going to create that, or call that folder Scissors Jack. And then make sure that that is our active folder. I have started a new file, and this one is also in inch units. Now, if it bothers you, the units, it's really a good idea to become fluent in using any units. There may be some locations in the world where they never see inch units, but I tend to go back and forth between inch and metric units pretty fluently. So I'm going to change the units on this, and once we change the units, it's just the numbers anyway. Be careful about your units. Now, you may also want to change the orientation of the Z-axis, particularly for 3D printing. I'm not sure what good a 3D printed scissors jack would do, but anyway, just to demonstrate, I'm going to go to this view cube on the front view, and I'm going to set that as the top view. And then I'll go around, so now Z is pointing up. So it doesn't really matter, just a demonstration of how to do that. So I'm going to go then to the top view, and I'll do a new sketch on this plane. And I'm going to draw a couple of construction lines, and I'll put these in space initially. I'll change those to construction. And then I'm going to do a midpoint constraint between this line and the origin, and a midpoint between this line and the origin. So the first thing I do when I'm designing a new part is I try to find symmetry within that part. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we could have done this. This is just one way. And then I'm going to do a rectangle, and I'm going to put this rectangle out in space, and I want all of that to be construction, or at least this line and this line to be construction as well. So I'll select those and I'll hit X on the keyboard, and then I'm going to do coincident. So I'll do coincident this point, and then the midpoint of that line, and then coincident this point to the midpoint of this line. I'll put in those two dimensions, that overall dimensions that we looked at, and so this distance is 5, and this distance from here to here is 3.5. And I see that this point is unconstrained, so I'll get this point to this line, and it actually doesn't want me to do that. I'll just try to, and I probably accidentally got 2 lines in here, so be careful about that. So I have an extra line that I had somehow gotten into my sketch. I'll put a link to the drawings, and try to go by the drawings to model this on your own, and then go back and look at how I did it. So I did 5 inches this way, 3 inches this way. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to put a rectangle here in the middle, and I could use a center point rectangle, but I'm going to do it this way, and I might purposely offset the center of that. And so I'll then do coincident between this line and the midpoint of this line, and a coincident between this line and the midpoint of that line. And so I'm looking for symmetry within my model, and I'll change this to construction, and I'll change this to construction. And then the distance, the overall distance from here to here is 1.5 645, and then this distance is 2.5. And so we see that that turns black. So I create one bit of geometry at a time and make sure that it's fully constrained, that it turns black before I continue creating additional geometry. I'm then going to create a line, and I'm trying to decide how I want to do this, but I'm going to create a line from here and then from here to here, and I'll also do it down here and then from here to here. And we could mirror these from this side to this side and to the other side. So let's do that instead. So let's go ahead and put a dimension on here. So I'll dimension the distance from here to here as 0.375. And we see that that geometry is fully defined. And so then we can just do a mirror of this line. And I might have trouble getting the shorter line. And so if I do a long left click, then I get a select other, and I can select this second line, and then the mirror line is about this line. Okay, so now I have that constrained, and then I'll do that same thing again. And so I'll do create mirror. Now I might put a window around this, but that would also get this line and this line, which I don't want to duplicate. So I'll hold down the control key and I'll unselect these two lines so that it doesn't mirror those two, and I'll mirror that to the other side. So be careful about avoiding the duplication of geometry. Alright, I'm going to finish this sketch, and I'm going to rotate around a bit, and then I want to do a sketch on this face. So I'll do a sketch and I'll do it on that face. Now there's a setting somewhere in your preferences to keep it from rotating around. I prefer to work in 3D, so I don't want this rotating around looking directly at that plane. Some people prefer though that it rotates around. You can set that in your preferences. I don't remember where it is exactly, but somewhere in there in your preferences. So I'll do P for project, and I'll get this point, and I'll get this point, and I'll say OK to that. I'm going to temporarily hide sketch number 1, and I will draw then a 2-point rectangle from this corner over to about here, and then I'll drag it to that corner, and so that's length of it is fully defined. And then I'll dimension the height of this as 0.375, and follow along on the drawings to see where I'm getting this dimension. So here's a 0.375, and I'll put in these other sketch elements. One thing that people will ask me is they'll say, just give me the model. I want the model to do the analysis. But I find that a lot of people don't really know how to model, and so I want to make sure that we know how to model geometry. The analysis doesn't really mean a whole lot if we can't model the geometry. I will then draw a line from here over to here, and I'll do the same thing from here over to here, and I will make these two lines equal. And again, I have trouble getting those two lines, and if I do a long left click, I can then get the select other, that line and this line. I want those to be equal, and I'll dimension this distance from here to here as 4.25. I'm going to put a vertical line here, and I'll change that to construction, so X on the keyboard, and I'll put a horizontal line above this vertical line. And I see a lot of people will make this as two separate lines. If you have a continuous line, make it as one piece of geometry. And I'll do coincident this point to shift the midpoint of this line, and I will dimension the length of this line as 2.5, and I'll dimension the height from here to the base, and that distance is 1.5. So that geometry is black. And then I will draw a line from here to here, and that geometry is black. From here to here, that geometry is fully defined. Now I could leave this sketch as it is, but I want to go ahead and put a couple of circles in here for some holes. So I'm going to draw a line, and initially I'll just put it out here in space. I'll draw a circle at each end of this line. I'll do equal this circle is equal to this circle. I'll dimension one of these circles as 0.25, and I'll dimension the distance between centers as 2. And I'm going to change this line to construction, and then I want the midpoint of this line somewhere on this line. So I'll do coincident. I'll select this line. I'll hold down the shift key. I'll get the midpoint of this line. So that centers that. And then I'll drag this up, and I'll put my height of where I want this. And so let's dimension from this line down to this line, and let's do that a distance of 1.125. Now actually I try to, when I put in or follow along on something like this, that I put the dimensions in the same location that they're on the drawing, so that students can follow me carefully. And so I'm going to put that over on the other side. Actually, let's just do, it'll give it a different D number, variable number, if I don't undo that. So I'll undo that in 1.125. And so we see that that is fully defined. Alright, I'll turn on the visibility of sketch number 1. I'm going to extrude this sketch up to the top of this sketch. So I'll do extrude, I'll select this, and I'll tell it to go to object, and I'll select the top of this. And so I have that first extrusion, make that sketch visible again, and I'll do extrude. And you may have trouble getting that sketch down inside here. If you do that long left click, and then you can get that profile. And I'm going to tell it to go symmetric through all, and I'll tell it I want the intersection between those two, and so we'll say OK to that, and I'll hide that sketch. Now I've gone entirely too long without saving this, so let's go ahead and save this, and I'll call this scissors jack. And then I'm going to go to the top view, and I am really irritated with myself that I didn't create this as a new component to start with, but we will convert this body to a new component. I'm going to hide that body for a moment though, and I'll turn on the visibility of sketch number 1, and I will create a new sketch then on the XY plane, and I'm going to P for project geometry, this center line and this center line. I'll hide sketch 1. I prefer to change these to construction, but it's not critically, it's important. And then I'm going to draw a line or a rectangle, and I'm going to put this rectangle about like this. And again, I could have used a center point rectangle. I'm going to do coincident this line to shift the midpoint of this line, and coincident this line to shift the midpoint of this line. I'll change these two lines, the vertical lines, to construction, and then I'm going to draw a line over on this side, and I want this line to be 1.05 in height, and I want it to be somewhere on this line. So I'll do coincident this line to shift the midpoint of this line, and I'm going to mirror that to the other side. So I'll do mirror this line to the other side of this construction line, and I'll dimension that overall distance from here to here as 4 inches. When we do that, we see that these two lines are fully defined. They turn black. I'll dimension the distance from here to here, and I'm going to do that as 0.75. And then I'm going to draw a line from here to here and from here to here. Now we have to be careful on this, that these lines do not become perpendicular to each other. So, and I can do just one on one side, and then I could mirror those to the other side, or I could just go, I'm not sure which way is faster. It's probably just as fast to do this as it is to do the mirror. Although the one advantage of the mirror is that would ensure that these are equal length, but because we did this symmetric here, even if I drag this, they stay symmetrical about this center line. And so that works out okay for us. And then I'm going to draw a circle somewhere on this line over here, and I'm going to do that as 0.375, and I'm going to mirror this one to the other side though. So I'll do mirror, and actually I have a mirror up here since I use it quite a bit. And then I'll do select this circle, I'll mirror it to the other side of the line of symmetry, and I'm going to dimension then the distance from this circle over to this circle, and that distance 3.25. So refer to the drawing to see where I am getting these dimensions from. Now I just realized that I had put the wrong dimension over here on this line, so I'm going to delete that dimension. And really where I wanted that dimension is from here to here, and I need to put an angle in here between this line and this line of 62 degrees. So refer to the drawing as I sketch out this geometry, and you should have right away, you should have been hitting your keyboard, hollering at me, telling me though, no, I'm doing it wrong, loud enough that I could hear you from wherever you are in the world. I'm going to draw a line, and I don't necessarily need this line, but I'm going to put it in for visual purposes, from the midpoint of this to the midpoint of this line. And I'll also do the same thing over here, although I don't really need it in two places. And I'm going to change those two lines to construction lines, so I'll select those and I'll hit the X, and then I'll do coincident one of these lines to the center of one of these holes. And when I do that, we see that all of this geometry turns black, and I don't even have a dimension from here to here. If I dimension that line and see what it is, I see that it comes in a different dimension that I have on my drawing. So I need to figure out what is different about this compared to my original. And so I'm going to assume that I don't want it at the midpoints of these two lines. I just want it on, I hit the wrong one, I want it on the angled lines. And so I'll delete those midpoint constraints. So these are the kinds of mistakes that you might make as you are going through and modeling something, and you don't have to start over. You can just edit what you have and then fix the mistake by editing. So I'll do 1.05, and then I see that I have white dots here, so when I remove those midpoints it didn't retain the coincidence. So I'll do midpoint this line to that point, and then I'll do coincident this point to this line, and this point to this line. And now we see that it all turns black, except that I still have some unconstrained geometry over here. So let's make sure we get rid of these white dots. Everything is fully constrained, and this line is not constrained somewhere, so we need to put a vertical constraint on that line. So we drag the geometry and see where it is not fully constrained. And again, I said we didn't really need this line. See, this was already fully constrained before I put that constraint on that line, so we didn't really need it. With our symmetry, everything is fully defined. I'll turn the visibility of the body back on again, and I'm going to do an extrude, and I want to get the whole area too, so I'll get all three of those areas. And for the distance, I'm going to go 0.25 and make sure that it's on cut, and so we cut this cavity down into here. I'll turn off this origin geometry for a few minutes, and then I'm going to do a fillet in all of the vertical edges of 0.125. And so I'm going to see if I can select this and get them all at the same time. So I'll go to fillets, I will go to my selection filters, I'll do select edge priority, and then I'll do a crossing window across here, and so that got only the vertical edges. Now I avoided this edge, so that's why I made my window fairly narrow up here to avoid this edge along the bottom of this slot, and I'll change that to 0.125. Now if you have trouble doing that, you can just go around and select each one of those edges manually. I'm then going to do another fillet, and I'll select this loop and this loop of edges, and I'll do those as 0.125. I'll go back and edit this previous fillet, and I'll get this loop of edges, So I'll hold down the control key and I'll add this loop group of edges to the fillet selection, and I'll also hold down the control and I'll get this edge and I'll get this edge right here, and so we've added those fillets. Now I'd also like to fillet this edge and this edge up here. I've had trouble in the past though if I add those two fillets now, so we could give it a try. It may or may not work. If it doesn't work, then we can go back and do those in a different order. So let's edit this feature, and I'm going to select this edge and I'll select this edge with the control key, and so I put those two fillets in, and then I'm going to do shell, and I'm going to select this top face, and with tangent edge on, it's chain those faces. And I'm also going to select this hole and this hole, and I'll put that thickness as 0.0625. Now it says it couldn't do that, so we'll undo back to where we put these two fillets on. So I'm going to undo, and I'll try doing that shell again. So I'll do shell, and I'll select this face and this face and this one, these two holes, and we'll try that shell again. And so that order, it works. So you have to be willing to try different orders of operations when something doesn't work as expected. And then I can try putting this shell or the fillets on here again. So I'll select these four corners, and let's drag that down, and I'm trying to decide how big I want to make those. Let's make those, we'll try 0.125, but I think I'm going to make them 0.25. Now I'll leave it at 0.125. Then I want to put some holes in the bottom of this part. Let's go back to our sketch number 3, and I'm going to edit that sketch, and let's add some additional geometry to this sketch, and we'll do a slot, a center point slot. So I'll select the origin as my first point, I'll come out some distance, and I'll put that slot. I'll dimension the distance from center to center as 1.5, and I'll dimension the height of that slot from side to side is, make that 0.5. Okay, I'll make that sketch visible, and then I'm going to do an extrude, and I'll select this circle, this slot, and this circle, and I'm going to tell it to go through all. We'll say okay to that. We'll hide our sketches, and let's put a color on this. So I'll go to that body and I'll right click, I'll go to an appearance, and you could set whatever color that you want on your part. Alright, let's go ahead and convert this to a component. So I'll right click and I'll do create component, and then I'm going to give that component a name, and I'm going to call that base.